It's recording now. Shall I begin?
I think I will.
There's no one there.
Water without ice, so I can drink it. Otherwise I'll disturb the meeting.
We can prune these things. Here we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another of the regular monthly meetings of Libertarian Herts at the Sheppel Community Centre. We meet every fourth Tuesday in the month. It is the fourth Tuesday. My name is Bob Layson. I'm chairman and speaker tonight, and I'm speaking on the subject of the economics we should have had, or might have had, contrasted with the ones we have, or the dominant schools that we have. We have moved from, let's say, 1880, 1890, and setting aside the socialists for this moment, we have moved from a theory explaining production to a theory justifying the controlling of producers. We have moved from the marginal school, the subjectivist school, who got rid of the cost theory of production and rather explained costs by means of final demand of the consumer, the judgments of the economic agent. All of this was, as far as I could see, as far as a good deal of theory need go. The rest of it was to supplement it, augment it, and deal with other things. Sadly, just about that time, we did have the socialists, the rise of the trade union movement, and that had to happen before something, be useful for something. It had to be virtuous because a lot of people thought it was and agreed with it, and so there had to be something to be won via either industrial action or state policy or even outright state socialism. We went from the rational agent analysis of an economic order, what Smith had called the simple system of natural liberty, which of course he didn't quite have then, but they had a lot more of it then than now. Although Smith and those who followed him argued for the extension of the system of liberty and the ending to the system of the mercantilist system or the tariff and bounty system, the control system, the apprenticeship system, the restriction of the movement of labour system, all of that was then there, but going, and have pretty much gone by the end of the 19th century. With the Married Women's Property Act was some say Mises, I believe, says that's just about as far as legislation needed to go. Everything else was a surplus to requirements and would make things worse. So from the rational act analysis of society, and society is nothing but an economy in one sense, or at least an economic process. And there can be social relations. I have argued that perhaps we should dump the idea of a society or an economy and just speak about property owners and production and exchange, and there's transportation, of course, but there's no reason to suppose that there are natural wholes, and certainly not the natural whole that is an economy. I can see that a nation state or state boundaries or a subject population, subject to tax and regulation, that was a kind of a thing, a unit, whether it's a natural one, well, seems to be a politically contrived one, and certainly an unnecessary one. That's what makes someone a libertarian, not that they have the idea to start with, but from an analysis of history and economic theory given them, or learnt by them, they see that is the way to go. It's not a prejudice, it's not really a prejudice either, since we're prepared to meet arguments and attempt to refute them, and if we can't, then we might have to change our position. But I think libertarians mostly will reason away any old day and quite happy to do so. So political economy, in a sense, Smith was doing this. He was giving advice to statesmen, in effect. And he was told that, yes, we've all read your book, Mr. Smith, he was told by the Prime Minister of the day. But the advice was, don't do that. Stop doing that. Leave that alone. That is not the sort of advice that economists like to give now, sadly. Sometimes it is, when the period of deregulation of various transport industries, airline industry, trucking industry in America, these things were good, but they were a matter of getting out and not piling in. Economics, I think, ought to be a matter of people economising. In a sense, it should never be an applied science. Economics, pure economics, should not help anybody make a better mousetrap, or transport one, or advertise one, or that's not what it's there for. Once the freedom is there, we'll get to the sound money perhaps later, there's very little for economists to do, and there shouldn't be tens of thousands of them all employed to give advice. There isn't little to know and little to say. It should be. No, you can't. I don't think it should be illegal for people to become economists or to study economics. They shouldn't be tax funded, of course, but they're not alone in that. But now they want to be the advisors to those who manage the economy, whereas in the past there were those who thought that economies can't be managed, but people and producers can be mucked about with by policy, even with the best of intentions by policy. So the place for economics, for the classical and late 19th century liberal economists, was to say don't do that. It was a negative kind of a thing. It wasn't applied except in that sense. It's applied by giving advice to people as what not to do. Sometimes it can be to undo things, so you can put it in a positive way. It'd be good if you got rid of the tax, it'd be good if you lowered the tax, whatever it might be. It can be done that way. And of course, it particularly has its place by saying socialism is an absurdity, an impossibility, but it can certainly be attempted, in some sense of attempted. It can be called an attempt at socialism, though you don't get any closer to it for every step that is taken. No, but a free market economy can very much be deranged, let us say, and a lot of it's kept under other titles, or it's illegal, or it's de facto collective or firm ownership, or even private ownership, a great deal carried on in the Soviet Union and elsewhere, when there are attempts to have socialism. But certainly the thing itself is an impossibility, but it can't be denied that governments using tyranny can have something going for many decades that is called socialism, or moving towards socialism, or something. That can't be denied. So economics is very good there, telling people what not to do, and especially that kind of thing. Minimum wage would also apply. The foolishness of that. Rent control. Rent control simply makes the housing situation far worse. It did, and that's why it was, even in this country, got rid of eventually. So, what went wrong? Well, as I've said already, it was a trade union analysis, and there's a lot of money flowing that way, a lot of votes going that way, so whether the governments agreed with it or not, it was a way for parties to rise to power. And the Labour Party, I suppose, did believe in it. It wasn't faking it, I suppose. I mean, they were sincere and they were wrong, but that's why sincerity doesn't count for a great deal unless you sincerely seek for truth and look for counter evidence. That's the important thing. We mustn't look for proof that we're right. We must look for the evidence that shows that we are wrong, the arguments and the evidence. In other words, we shouldn't allow ourselves to look for confirmation. That's known as the confirmation bias, which we all tend to do, mostly because we're disconfirmation phobic. We don't like the idea of being wrong. All the effort and fine opinion of ourselves is misplaced, and that's not a very pleasant thing to experience. So we had democracy, universal suffrage pretty much, so that parties that promised this, that and the other of our state were popular. It was popular just anyway, you might say, but people have to think it's not a bad thing, so they have to believe there are certain things about the market order that mean that it could be improved upon by this or the other. Of course, it was all done a little step at a time. Like the pensions came in this country, I believe, and it was only people over 80, I think, or certainly pretty advanced years, and there weren't many of them who would get a pension. Of course, eventually the age limit was lowered, and the amount handed out was raised. But always small cuts, like the boiling the frog a little bit at a time, and the frog won't notice, some say. They never tried it. So we had these little incremental encroaches upon a natural system of liberty, and nothing too bad. And it seemed to have emerged from friendly societies and voluntary cooperation. So when the unions and the others got, the law on their side, so they could intimidate people and boycott and blackleg and all the rest of it, it didn't seem so bad. And anyway, it was a good thing they were doing, and you shouldn't be selfish. Well, organised self-interest is all right if it's a union, but you shouldn't do it individually, then it makes it wrong. The economics of the late 19th century was being replaced by, at least in practice, some of the economists did tut-tut, but of course they're not listened to if there are no votes in following their advice, and they didn't seem to be at the time. But what really put the kibosh on it, as it were, was the Great Depression, which is fully explicable, I believe, using the economics of the late 19th century, but it was not thought to be, or at least the advice given by economists from that period, and those who were still of that mind, were to make it easy to employ people, make it easy to start factories, make it easy to save and invest. Good evening.
Good evening. How are we?
Yeah, please join us. It's been started a while, but you'll soon get the hang of it.
I know. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No. You can see the replay. We just got to the Great Depression when you came in, so that seemed appropriate. Now, what made the Great Depression worse, at least as regards the theories of economists, is that we had a great economist as well as the Great Depression. And that was John Maynard Keynes, of course, who explained it was all due to the fact that all the bourgeois virtues of the late 19th century and the theory of the late 19th century took it for granted that an economy was self-regulating, self-correcting, and there could not be chronic mass unemployment. Just couldn't happen. Of course, Cannon and others, who was pretty much from the late 19th century, said, of course you can get as much unemployment as you pay for. Easily done. But that was thought to be unhelpful. There had to be another way. And it also it's not nice to lower people's wages, or ask them to be lowered, or ask them to accept lower wages. Although Keynes elsewhere in his work points out that, look, we're going to lower their wages, we're going to do it in a way they won't notice, and they won't cut up about. We're going to inflate their wages away. The nominal wages will remain, perhaps even slightly increase, but the purchasing power will not go up, or not go up as it might, and may even go slightly down. But there'll be more people employed, so the overall purchasing power being exercised by the working class will increase, and that'll be an increasing demand, and that's how we're going to do it. Moving, yes, it is in a sense moving even further away from the late 19th century view of things, is when Friedman turns up, who is thought himself to have somewhat put Keynes in his place by pointing out certain things wrong with his view of matter and his view of what the workers will do once they get their extra money, even if it's a bit funny money, with his permanent income hypothesis, things of that kind, so that if you tell people there's just going to be a burst of this, that and the other spending, or there's going to be a tax cut or something, but it's not going to last, then people don't rush out and spend it all necessarily. They may save it. And so in any event, it drains away the supposedly a beneficial effect of this kind of this kind of a jiggery-pokery by governments to try and get things going. And indeed, Friedman is another kind of, well, he's a monetarist plainly, but he's another expansionist, he's another inflationist. He doesn't call it such. He means monetary accommodation. There has to be a growing money supply to accommodate people who need accommodating, I assume. The economy can't possibly work with a fixed money supply, and I believe it very easily can. Easily. Modern governments, and this is very topical, don't at all like the idea of a fixed money stock. Indeed, they're deliberately unfixing it at the greatest rate known in history for all nations. I'd say the number of nations engaged in it, it's nothing compared to the hyperinflations of the 20th century. Not yet. I don't think it will be quite the same way, but it's doing. They're doing very strange things with the money supply. Most of which, of course, isn't circulating. It's bank reserves at the central bank, but it has other perverse consequences before it gets released, which is on the interest rate that savers get, and on the indebtedness of governments. And as the Greeks will prove, real production has to be really produced, and you cannot vote yourself out of austerity. It's not austerity that hurts, it's reality. Now, they could have a different reality. They could scrap their ridiculous early retirements and being paid 13 months for 12 and all sorts of things they have over there. All sorts of restrictions on who can work where, do what. Ridiculously good pensions for state employees that they can get early. Things of that kind. They won't do it, I don't think. They just elected the very sort of people who won't do that kind of thing. So the best that the Greeks can hope for is a sort of slight haircut in the amount they're expected to pay, and perhaps a longer period over which to repay it. But they're not going to have a policy of growth. The cliche recently has become, let's not have this policy of austerity, let's have a policy of growth. Oh, fine. Who objected to growth? Who objected to a fuller employment? True employment, where what was made sold and covered the cost of employing people. No objection to that at all. As if it's a deliberate choice. The choice was for governments to tax less and spend even less than they raise in tax, in effect. But loosen up, remove the restrictions, allow business to get going. But no, they're happy with one side of it, but not happy with either side of that. That they don't want to spend less, they don't want to tax less. Well, no, certainly not. Partly because they don't want to spend less. In fact, they want to spend more. They think they have to. They think the emergency requires it. And of course, it just makes matters worse. So, what do we now have? We now have a system whereby, far from saying leave things alone, economists now think it's their job to say exactly what should be done, what should be taxed, what should be subsidised. Not all of them, of course, but a great many of them. And certainly, there seems to be unanimity that the central bank, and we are fortunate to have them, because we have these separate economies, there must be a means of adjusting monetary and fiscal policy to the needs of that particular economy. Maybe so. I think if you just knock someone down, you should at least help pick them up. But it'd be better not to knock them down in the first place, I'd have thought. And that is what running the economy, on the advice of economists, of course they always pick the economists that tell them what they want to hear. I mean, some economists may say, no, don't. But no doubt they can say there's a consensus, or the finest minds, or whatever, are revising in to do what they want to do. So we'll switch from leave alone to, by all means, control this and this. And this, not micromanage the economy, of course not. That would be foolish. That would be interventionists. That would be socialists. No. Just hit everything knock everything sideways with your monetary policy. And you can throw in the tax policy as well. And the regulatory policy, that's not helping much. But certainly, what has given the excuse, what has given the appearance that someone has to manage the economy, given and attend to the advice of the best, the finest economists, is the previous attention paid to economists and the previous actions taken, such as have a good for business interest rate, a good for the economy, growth in the money supply, picking winners in industry, having infrastructure projects, grand projets, and they make work too. And they also make work in constituencies where you wish to get elected, possibly. Oh, what a terrible cynic. I ought to be. Not yet, I'm working on it. So, we have gone from that to this. And as a result, we, like sheep, are being led, and no doubt shall be surely fleeced. The C of E is very fond of taxation. They think it's the nearest thing they've got to Christianity. Not sure what they believe, but they certainly believe in the NHS and in taxation. They believe that. So the sheep must be fleeced. I'm reminded of a Laurel and Hardy episode in one of their films where it's starting to rain and Ollie has said to Stan, "Don't be so selfish. Give me the umbrella." So it's all right to be selfish on behalf of other people. So you can say, "Give that up. Force that man to give that up. Oh, and give it to him." Okay, but isn't he just as selfish as the Yes, but he's not as rich. But he might be less worthy, even though he's more poor, as it were. But I don't think they go into too much into the theory. But there's less excuse. They should go into the theory. There are plenty of simple introductory works on the market process. So we now have almost universal moneyed madness, or at least same-ish in much of the world. But it isn't truly madness. Very few people are mad in the sense that you can't make head nor tail of what they're doing. They can't give you a coherent explanation of why they're doing what they're doing. I think that's very rare. What does the damage is having false beliefs and incorrect explanations of cause and effect. So you find it rather difficult to get things, to see things the way they are in the first place, and then get them to be what we would like them to be in the second place. And that's not madness so much. In other words, people can rationally work from this to this, but they're not too keen, see my earlier remarks, not too keen about getting the explanations right and checking on the facts they wish to explain and the situations they wish to move from where we are today, let's say. Right then, what now? What is going to change matters? Well, yours truly and your own gathered selves are a kind of a sign of what is happening around the world. This sort of thing wasn't happening a couple of generations back, 10 years ago, not here. There are far more libertarian groups around the world. There's far more interest in the Austrian school of economics, and not just that one, but more pro-market, also the other way. But very few are actually suggesting getting rid of market production and exchange. That is good. Sadly, they advocate policies that make it a lot less effective or efficient. But no one actually argues, I don't think, for socialism. But they argue for something, for a great deal of statism, an activist state, which is not, of course, what Adam Smith and the rest of us much cared for. So meetings like this, talks like this, are straws in the wind. Now, they may be just straws in the wind, or bales of straw in my case, or possibly even fullness of wind, regular wind. But it will be the sound of a mighty rushing wind eventually, not coming from here necessarily, but round the world, I think, because something has to give. And I don't think that the world economy will collapse in a heap. Some even some libertarians speak like this. The real trouble will come from what governments do in response to the emergencies or the situations as they see them. And of course, there will be more government, more control, more money. They may even have to go in for, well, if they start getting the inflation, they may have to go in for price control. They will probably choose to go in for price control and the rest of it, and we know what that can lead to. But I think we should be optimistic about this. When people are worried, they may try something new. Trouble is, they may try something new and ruinous for them. That is the downside. So what can people such as myself hope to be? No great academic, not on the telly, not book signing in foils or anything like that. So what can we do? Well, we educate ourselves and others, that's something. But people like me can hope to be a kind of Alfred Russel Wallace, the chap who didn't exactly wake up Darwin, but Darwin thought he had to get a move on. In fact, Darwin thought that was it. In all honesty, he has to say this man has, in a sense, published first. But his friend said, no, he literally hasn't published yet. It was a letter to you, and you know that you had the same idea many years earlier. So you made the famous compromise. No, I don't think Russell Wallace had much to do with it. He was probably abroad, he usually was.
Yes.
And so they planned a meeting, and they both papers were read. And just enough of a legal order, it happened that Darwin was ahead of Wallace. So in a sense, it was made public first. But they didn't fall out or anything like that. But they did meet, and they respected each other. So one can hope to be an Alfred, or hope that people like me and yourselves are a kind of Alfred Russel Wallace, who will wake up someone somewhere who has been thinking along these lines for some time, but hasn't yet published. And when they do, it'll have far more of an effect. Actually, I think we're more likely to be an Alfred Russel Wallace who stimulates a somewhat bigger Alfred Russel Wallace, which may eventually lead to a Darwin of the day, returning us to an economic practice, or rather to an economics that is all theory and no advice, pretty much, apart from the negative sort I said. Economics should never have become an applied science. It shouldn't be like engineering. It shouldn't give you blueprints for managing the economy. That should not be what goes on. The whole thing, as the French say it, or a Frenchman said it in French, the world goes by itself. The famous laissez-faire, laissez-passer, let things alone, let these people be. If you have private property, freedom of contract, and the rest of it, these things will integrate. There's no great difficulty in integration. It's simply being alive and producing. It's been made to seem a lot more demanding, a lot more involved than this. That there has to be something that coordinates. There has to be the role played by prices. Well, prices do play an important part, or rather, people who make things and price them, and people who want things at a price, are able to get together and exchange the good. It is the good that does all the good. It's important to have the free setting of priced goods. Yes, the goods are the good thing, of course, and I don't deny that free prices bring them about, but economists have allowed themselves to think that all the work's somehow being done by the prices, or the work's being done by the money. That's this sort of more Keynesian. They don't quite say it out loud because it is a bit silly, but it's almost at the background. They had this kind of picture. The mere sloshing of money, moving of money, driving of money is like, it is literally turning the wheels of industry. So if we can get more money moving along, it puts everyone to work. And I think that view gets things entirely backwards, which is that in a money economy, in an economy of private production, specialist production for exchange, made for exchange, it's not made for own use. In fact, in an economy, and this is the whole world, and we don't even call it an economy, it's just different producers all around the world, some near each other, some distant, some not so far. They make their own product, usually by using inputs that are the output of other producers. In other words, there is a system of using here, from here and here to make this and this and this and set it there. Now, that is integration of a kind. It wasn't required to be brought about. Anytime, the whole point of private property is it allows you to get out of each other's way, and yet be in great contact with each other. There had to be roads and railways and sea lanes and the rest of it. But this is a matter of private property or communal property. There can be common ways, like the sea is a common way outside territorial waters these days for ships to go on. So the idea that somehow that the money is going to force things, to cohere, or government policy is going to make things cohere. Coherence, I think even coherence perhaps, makes it seem more difficult than it is. There are independently producing producers. There is